How's everybody doing? Getting toward the end of the day? All right, so we're going to talk about solving networking's original sin at the edge. Since there's not really a lot of information in here that's forward-looking, but the legal team does require me to say this. So if there is any information, please read the statements. I want to start with this. Anybody have an idea of what this is? Any guesses? Food truck? I'm from Portland, Oregon, so I would think this would be a food truck because honestly, I love food. My wife and I like to cook. I'm kind of involving this in this discussion, but actually this is not a food truck. This is called the SRI van. Why is it important? On August 27th, 1976, this van was part of the first two-way transmission ever recorded. A month later, they did a three-way transmission. And in perfect San Jose tech history, this took place at a biker bar in San Jose. This was the first time TCP/IP was used in the field. So why is that important? The father of TCP/IP, Vin Cerf, he was at UCLA, and he had a buddy named Bob Kahn. Together, they created what became APRANET. APRANET begot the TCP/IP protocol. And what is critical about this is that in 1976, this protocol became the foundation for what we know now as the internet. At that time, Vin Cerf said he understood that this protocol was going to change things, but his scope for changing things was in the realm of 100 to 200 devices on the network. He had little idea that 50 years later, the protocol that he founded with Bob Kahn would turn into something that today powers over 40 billion devices, and the internet now consumes roughly 40 zettabytes of data. What did they forget? They forgot security. So how do we solve that? What do we need to do? I'm John Spiegel. I am the field CTO for the HPE Aruba Networking SSE portfolio. I'm also an HPE Distinguished Technologist. I also run a podcast called The Edge as part of a side gig that I do, part of the SSE Forum, where we look to help people adopt frameworks like SASE, like SSE, and Zero Trust. So that's what I do. I also love to cook, and this is honestly one of my passions. And after a long day of working, my wife and I will sit down and do an amazing meal. The thing is, I'm very good at the adventurous side. I like to pick the menu. I like to make the basis of the meal. She, on the other hand, has a skill that I don't have. She makes things taste amazing. Her powers are really salt, pepper, maybe a dash of citrus, maybe some garlic powders involved in there, but she has that ability. In networking and security, we're also looking to combine something that needs to come together for us to be successful in this new era of cloud-delivered applications and now a distributed workforce. And it's really about this. There are two different objectives from two different teams. Networking, it's all about optimizing paths between applications, paths on the network. It's all about speed and performance. Security, on the other hand, is about risk reduction. It's about making sure we don't get compromised, we don't leak out critical information. It's about securing the business. These two forces are in constant opposition, or have been in constant opposition since the dawn of IT. So how do we start to solve this? What are the things that we start to need to be thinking about? And what are the impediments for this to be successful? It's really about this. Today in networking, we're using solutions from multiple vendors. that result in multiple UIs, that creates a lot of complexity that we have to fix. Think about an application and how we deploy an application and what happens when an application breaks. We have to bring a team together. They have to kind of sort out who is at fault and where the problem is. It takes a lot of time. It consumes a lot of resources. The costs are also high. We live in a siloed world of siloed technologies. And nowhere is this seen greater than in the security space. We see siloed technologies like remote access. How do we control SaaS applications with CASB, DLP, or maybe it's just how do we secure the cloud? The result of that is putting these applications, these tools together is difficult to do because they may or may not have good API support, and as a result, we have a lack of visibility. And probably the biggest challenge here is policy sprawl. If I'm writing policy in tool A, tool B, tool C, I'm likely to make an error somewhere, or those policies are not congruent, and thus we get access to applications that we shouldn't have. And nowhere is this seen greater than in the remote access scenario. So let's take the case of Amy. And Amy, she's somebody who works in HR, and really what she wants to do is just get her job done. She doesn't want a lot of hassle from IT, but yet here's kind of her journey on a daily basis. And since she's working from home, her first thing she's going to do is connect to the internet, and then she's going to be greeted by a firewall. She's going to have to pass through a VPN connector, DDoS defense mechanism, a NAC ADC device, SSL decryptor, because we got to see what's inside her packets. Then there's an IPS, only to be greeted yet again by another firewall. But here's the thing. Her application, it lives out on the internet. So what we did here was we put Amy through an IT security gauntlet. And it's very likely that her packets had to cross 8 different devices from 8 different companies, 8 different vendors, and it's also very likely that our solutions are managed by multiple silos within IT. And then if we start to look at the greater picture, if we pan away from that journey of Amy as the one employee, we see a greater problem. Another view. The pace of digital transformation is placing even greater stress on our traditional networks. They were originally designed to deliver data back from the campus or the branch to a single private data center. But yet here we are in this age of distributed applications, distributed employees. This very same network is being tasked with new things. Could be AI as a service from a company like HPE, or it could be AWS, or it could be an IaaS application. But more often than not, it's a SaaS application like Workday or Salesforce. Now, I cannot stress this enough. These solutions were designed in the 90s to connect to a single data center. Yet here we are leveraging them to connect to centers of data in just about every corner of the world. But here's the challenge. Just about everything else in IT has changed. But this, how to deliver an application securely. So how do we change this metric? How do we reduce the complexity? Here are kind of my thoughts on it. First of all, we have to think about a new model. And the pandemic kind of spawned that conversation. And that model needs to be based on how do we leverage new tooling, new things, and how do we make the CIO and the CISO think differently about networking? First thing we need to do is embrace that hardware solutions of the past are really a dead end. We need to transform what we had in the data center from the security stack, even from the network stack, transform it into software and distribute it on the internet. We need to eliminate the complexity. The second thing we need to realize is that the remote access user is likely leveraging the internet 100% of the time. In the campus and the branch, it's kind of similar. So we need to look at a simple model, one that's focused on speed and ease of access to the internet. We also need to consider policy. For far too long, networking and security have been out of alignment with the needs of the business. We need to focus on building network security policy based on business requirements. And finally, I need to talk about the elephant in the room. Zero trust networking and its other cousin, software-defined perimeter. For far too long, we have been thinking about these solutions in a different way, and we've been bombarded by the marketing from different vendors. Think about it. There's different solutions out there. Micro-segmentation-based ZTNA, device-based ZTNA, whole host of solutions. Now, we need to understand that that's a good thing. It's very admirable to go down that path. Zero trust as a strategy is part of the path forward, and we need to start thinking about that. So where does that leave us? It leaves us here with this new framework called SASE that was developed by the analyst firm Gartner in 2019. Now, I'm not going to play buzzword bingo with you and go through all the different technologies of SASE and what it means and what it doesn't mean. So really what SASE is its goal is to overcome the dilemma faced by the CIO, the CISO, the network engineer, when they're asked to deploy a new application. Traditionally, the choices are this. You either can favor speed, which equals performance, or you can favor security. And more often than not, we know what the choice is. It's speed, because speed equals employee performance and employee productivity. So SASE, what it does is it takes what in the past were these solutions that lived in the data center, transforms them into software, and puts them out on the internet as points of presence. It allows you to overcome that dilemma. You can now deploy your applications with both speed and performance. So what does that look like? What does that look like in action? Here's a representation of what really SASE looks to do. In terms of what SASE does, is say I'm John, I'm in Abu Dhabi, and I need access to a SaaS application, or maybe it's an SAP database located in Houston, Texas. Traditionally, I would have to connect with a VPN, and I would be hardwired with a path back to that application. With SASE, what I'm doing is I'm taking the elements out of the data center, moving them to cloud infrastructure as points of presence, positioning them in the centers of the internet on the key areas where they are, and then using my client to ask what is the fastest path? Which POP is closest? Which POP is going to give me the most performance? And it will run over that network to get to this destination. That's essentially what SASE does. Move security, move networking as close as possible to the resource requesting it and the application. Overcome that dilemma. So let's talk a little bit about SSE, the security side of SASE. So SASE is broken into two pillars: network access with SD-WAN, security with SSE. And what you'll find is when you take a look at each different vendor, each different offering, they all have a point of view. And each of those point of views is informed on where that company started and what problem they were looking to solve. It could be SWIG, because that's where that company thought the problem needed to be solved. Or it could be Cloud Access Security Broker. Or maybe it's firewalling, because that is where that company has expertise. Here at HPE Aruba Networking, we believe that SSE and SASE really start with Zero Trust Network Access. It's the foundation of the future. Everything else that we do in terms of SSE and SASE is really a feature built on top of ZTNA. The reason for this is we believe that applications need to be delivered with minimum access to the rest of the network. Reduce the amount of trust that you have when you have an application deployed. It's very critical. And that's how we start to solve the original sin of networking. So how does this work in action? Basically, what we do is we take that cloud distributed architecture and run our employees through a POP, and that POP will broker that connection. Start doing the security outside of the corporate walls, outside of the corporate data center. So you'll request access for an application. Basically, that will be run through an IDP, and then our cloud will auto-mediate that. It will only provide that surgical connection back into the network. But before that happens, we evaluate it. We start to look at the policy and how it's built. Is that user resident in the IDP? Do they have a device that we've sanctioned for corporate use? Is that device up to the corporate standards? We can also check to see if MFA has been approved. Start to do risk analysis to make sure that whatever that request is, it's valid. We can even do time of day, those types of things. If it is approved, we'll allow that connection through. The other thing we'll do is we'll constantly vigilantly watch that connection in action. So if there's something that changes, say the device fails the posture check, or the IDP is, or the user is removed from the IDP, we can automatically remove that connection, sever that connection in the moment. What does this provide? It reduces the attack surface for people that have to manage. Reducing the attack surface also reduces what you have to manage. You also gain visibility because you're running it through one solution. And then finally, there's no pass-through connections, unlike VPN. So what does that journey look like? How do you get to this journey of SASE? How do you bring together networking and security? It's really about finding business problems. What sort of things do you want to solve within your company? And then starting to look at where other problems are. What we see from customers is their major challenge is third-party access. It could be a vendor, it could be a contractor that you have, or maybe it's somebody that needs to work on some OT equipment. That generally is a risk to the organization because that person or that resource needs access to maybe one or two resources on the network. Yet, here we are, oftentimes traditionally VPNing them in. That's an area where we can help out with an agentless solution. After you get comfortable with that sort of solution, the next step is really starting to look at VPN from an employee perspective, supporting your hybrid workforce with a ZTNA approach, only giving them access to the applications they need, and then being able to vigilantly watch and see that there isn't any overprivileging. After that, starting to look at solutions like a SWIG to protect them from the threats of the internet. Or maybe you want to control applications that are SaaS-based with a CASB. We can also start to do that and provide a very unified approach. And then finally, add in solutions like digital experience monitoring, which allow you to watch how an application's performing and find out if there's a challenge somewhere. If that application is not responding right, you can tell where the problem is. Is it the client? Is it the middle mile? Or is it the SaaS-based application or something in the private data center? Start to get down to the time where you have mean time to innocence to solve problems that are in your production environment. We're seeing more and more people start their SASE journey with SSE, but you can also start certainly with SD-WAN and start to work your way in. So I've kind of given you the ideas of what SASE is, what it's not. I've kind of given you the ingredients to cook your own story. But let me finish with this. When asked what did Vincef think about the original sin of networking, he said this: it comes down to trust between computers. I didn't think about that when I was designing the TCP/IP protocol. So if I could go back and do it again, that's an area that I would focus on. So please take the time, enjoy the rest of the show, and start to think about how you can leverage SASE to start to secure the network edge, and then start to work inward and start to solve the original sin of networking. Thank you very much.